Good day, everybody. Welcome to another in the series of In Conversation with Graeme Codrington. It's great to have you along again. Those of you who might have been here before, this is Webinar Jam. If you haven't used it before, please won't you just introduce yourself? I see a few of you jumping in to do that. Marilyn, you got in first today. Nice to see you. Yes, Jane and a few other people. I'm also in a chilly Johannesburg. Winter is definitely here with a vengeance in the Southern Hemisphere. But it's wonderful to have you logging in. I'm seeing London. Steve from Yorkshire again. Excellent. It's probably not as cold there, or even if it is as cold in Yorkshire, Steve, you probably don't notice it as much as we are. Today I'm joined by somebody, those of you who've been with me in a lot of these conversations will know I say this often, that this is something I've really been looking forward to. But this one I really have, because Lynda Smith and I have known each other for at least 20 years. It probably goes longer than that, and worked together for that time. Lynda was one of our associates at Tomorrow Today for a while before she left to do what she's doing right now, which was about, more than a decade ago, I think, when Lynda had a vision of what was going to happen in the future, a vision of the fact that the older generations in the workplace, if we put it this way, the new older generations would not behave in the same way as the older people had been. If that doesn't make sense, it will make sense in a few minutes. And Lynda came to us at the team at Tomorrow Today and said, I want to do this thing. And we thought she was right, but just a bit ahead of her time. And she said, well, then I'm going to just do it anyway. And so, Lynda, it's great to have you with us. And we'll talk a little bit about what exactly it is that you do. But I'm really thrilled that you could take some time and chat to us today.
Thanks, Graeme. And yeah, you're not kind to yourself there, actually. It actually was you that prompted this conversation. I didn't come up with the idea. So yes, in those days, and at 15 years ago, these were the words. I remember them clearly.
Yes.
You said the baby boomers will not retire like previous generations. And you're looking for something new to do. So why don't you look at what that means for South Africa? And
Yep.
So that was in 2005,
Right.
so 15 years ago. So for those who doubt that you're a futurist, you got it right. The challenge for me, who was listening, was to try and start a business 15 years before anybody knew what we were talking about, because really it's only now starting to become common conversation. So thank you for the opportunity you gave me all those years ago, and it's wonderful to be here this afternoon.
Well, Lynda, let's dive in straight away then and talk about exactly what it is that you had in mind, because so for those who don't know the language we're using, the baby boomers is a label that is given normally to people who were born roughly in the 1950s and 60s. And it's a really powerful generation that has changed the world. And 15 years ago, I wrote a book and suggested that the baby boomers were not going to just go into the quiet night at age 60 and head off into retirement with their gold watches as their parents had done, and that they were going to stick around. And in fact, that the next United States presidential election is going to be between two baby boomers in their 70s is literally exactly what I predicted in my book 15 years ago, that the baby boomers would just not give up power and would not walk away. And in some cases, that's a good thing. In some cases, it's a bad thing. But what you saw, Lynda, was that there was going to be a need for support and assistance and networks, because even though you carry on working, you can't carry on working in the same way that you were working in your 30s and 40s and 50s. And so, you went and started the Refirement Network, still one of my favorite names. So tell us a little bit about that. We're going to talk about your other project in a moment, but tell us a bit about the Refirement Network.
So around that time, obviously I had been in the early childhood field, so didn't learn anything other than the generational information that I had learned through Tomorrow Today and working with you. And so I decided, and I was at a crossroads myself. I was just turning 50, and walking away from a great job that I had, but thinking about what my next season would look like. And I think many people, locally and globally, are at crossroads at different times in their lives. But for me, at that point, making the decision that I wanted to do something around this concept. And in 2009, actually, Gibbs ran a social entrepreneurship certificate course. And I chose to go and study that, looking at the South African context of what longevity and technology would be doing to this generation. Those of us that are in from your early 50s right now into the mid 70s. And so that was what I did in 2009 under Refirement Network, became a retirement life coach, not a financial coach, but basically helping people to start to grapple with the fact that if technology was changing the way we need to live, work, and play, and longevity is meaning we're living longer, then we certainly can't look at the way our parents and grandparents lived this season of their life. And in fact, in Lynda Grattan and book, and Andrew Scott's book on the 100-year life, they talk about we will live longer, 10 years longer than our parents, 20 years longer than our grandparents, and over the last 100 years, we are living 30 years longer than our great-grandparents. And so for many of us, we just move from retirement into the next phase of life without thinking and grappling about these two macro trends of technology and longevity.
And Lynda, the reason I wanted to talk to you today, this series of conversations I'm having with people, is to help companies and organizations and people, I suppose, individuals too, when you've kind of gotten over the COVID crisis, not that it's in the past yet, but when you've kind of realized, okay, this is what it is, and now you begin to say, so what do I do? How do I live with COVID? What's the world going to look like after COVID? There are other forces at play in the world that are going to be accelerated, I believe, by COVID. So I spoke to Rappeling Rabana last week about digital transformation, which I think will be accelerated by COVID. And I think that one of the forces that is going to be spotlighted, and I'm not exactly sure how it will be impacted, but I know that it will be a big theme, is this issue of the baby boomers' longevity. So people living longer, people not stopping working. So the concept of retirement changing dramatically. And that has got a consumer implication. So there are implications for your clients, your customers, and so on. But it also has a workforce implication as well, because a lot of companies need to be thinking differently about forced retirement, compulsory retirement age. And even if there is a compulsory retirement, we know half the companies just bring people that they want back as consultants anyway. So it's a bit of a misnomer, even if they have retirement. So let's set the scene for everybody, because you've just made some statements there about longevity that maybe some people haven't really taken account of. COVID isn't going to wipe out the old people in the world. We know that old people are more significantly impacted by this. But we're talking about 60, 70-year-old people who are fit, who are healthy, who've got everything about them, who will probably, if they even get COVID, they'll be able to handle it reasonably well from a fitness and a health perspective. So what should people have in their mind if we talk about the older generation or the 50-plus generation? We've got the wrong picture, don't we?
I think that ageism is still very rife in the minds of all of us. And I think COVID-19, with the focus on the older people being more at risk, has brought that ageism even more to the fore. And I spend my life convincing people that everybody who is over 50, 55 or 60 is not a senior or old. Because if we're looking at between 50 and 100, that's half your life. And longevity means that many more people will live into their 80s and their 90s. And so the first thing we need to do is to at least divide this group into two, the younger old and the older old. That's the way I like to talk about them, because there's so many other terms around. And I call
so when do I cross over into older old, Lynda?
When your health fails.
Okay, so it's not an age. It's
I have a diagram that I use in my presentations. 50 to 75 is the gifted season we've been gifted with as the extra season of life. But I always have to define in my sessions that it doesn't mean on your 75th birthday that you move over, because it depends completely on your health, your mental health, as well as your physical health, because we're well aware that old age does bring certain diseases, and some of those are genetic that are outside of our control. But sadly, I see too many that are between 50 and 75 who are spiraling downwards because they've lost a reason, or their identity was tied up in the work that they did, and they have not evolved into who am I in this new season. And that takes work. It's not a process of you stop work on a Friday and on a Monday. We are human beings, not doings. But sadly, especially for this generation, their identity has been in their title or their work. And it takes a lot of personal work to grapple with what does this next season look like.
Lynda, I actually think you've just answered a question that Eddie probably asked while you were answering it. But let me put the question to you, because I think it'll help. He said, what's more important for this older season, a life plan or a financial plan? I'm pretty certain I know the answer, because a lot of this generation also measured their life by how much money they were getting, didn't they? Yes. And then as soon as the salary stops, they don't know how to measure their life anymore.
I talk a lot to financial planners in trying to convince them that this is becoming a much more important piece of their clients' lives. And both are important, but it's more important that we know who we are. Because I know a lot of grumpy, miserable, rich people too.
And a lot of rich people that don't have a purpose for living, because you can only go on, you can't go on any cruises anymore. I mean, are people going to be going on these big cruise liners with COVID in the air? Not this year, and maybe not for a while. And I think that there was this perception of what retirement was supposed to look like, and it isn't like that at all, is it? And so you find a lot of people who are struggling to work out, what do I do? I mean, I'm turning 50 this year. I can't believe I'm even saying that.
Yes, we know that, Graeme. 50 plus membership will be handed to you with an invoice on the
absolutely. I'll pay my fees. I'm not sure how willingly I'll pay them. Maybe the older I get, the easier it'll be to stomach that. But I'll do it, I promise. But the point is, I don't know what it's like to feel 60 or 70. But I certainly don't know what it's like to feel 50 either, and I'm a few weeks away from it, because this is not what it was supposed to feel like. And I suppose that's what a lot of people are feeling, is this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and they don't actually have a plan to put it together. So that's part of what you do, right?
Yes, as a retirement life coach, and then through our other business, 50 Plus Skills, we're in a collaborative community where we're helping people to navigate this new season, or the gift season, or extra season. Because the one thing, though, that is critical to understand is that this extra season is unique for every person. It's not the same as a cookie cutter 20 BCom students who've just finished their university degree. They're quite similar. But take 40 years on from that, 30 or 40 years on, you've got skills, you've got experience, you've lived life, you have money or you don't have enough money, you have good health or you don't have good health. And so all of those things need to be taken into account, plus your openness to adaptability, resilience, and being curious and to learn. Because obviously one of the big factors that technology has brought is that our linear world of education, work, retirement, and death has changed into a multi-stage life where we need to constantly upgrade ourselves into what we want to do next. And with that comes learning. And that learning doesn't have to be a degree. It can be reading a book. It can be attending these webinars. It can be belonging to a community. Bite-sized chunk learning, and can work for a lot of people. So yes, that for me is absolutely critical.
So obviously everybody's different and each individual has their own path, but there are some mega trends that are important, right? So you've mentioned one, which is demographics. So the likelihood that you will live longer than you thought you would is very high. What are some of the other mega trends that you think people need to be aware of as they think about the older generation, whether it's for them or their parents or customers or employees?
Right. So yes, the longevity one is absolutely key. The technology one is the second that I've also mentioned, because technology through the internet and smartphones and technology, again, in this generation's working lifetime came into being. So many have equipped themselves with the skills, but computers were the size of houses for this generation when we were growing up. So we are not like our grandchildren who kind of almost born with the technology in our DNA. It is still a learned skill that many fear. And so
did I see some research done recently that said that there was some ridiculously low percentage of people in this older generation who just not even on LinkedIn, for example?
Yes, I was, I had seen that via Peter DeToy, who's one of our members within 50 Plus, and evolved a lot in helping to teach digital literacy skills. And digital literacy skills is almost like the ABC or the 3 R's of the 20th century. It's critical for us all to learn these skills to be able to communicate. And basically, technology and the stat is that only 3% of South Africans on LinkedIn, there's only 3% of people over 55 out of the 7.5 million people that are on LinkedIn. That is such a low percentage compared to the amount that should be growing, because this is a generation who is starting to take charge of their own next season, because in many cases you won't be employed. You may get employed back from contract by contract as a facilitator or as a consultant, but in many cases you'll be running your own business. But learning digital skills, connection skills, collaborative skills, absolutely key, that come through technology. And really we need to be able to make sure that we have those skills. The third one is from a South African perspective, and I know this audience is global, but I studied the South African context of what this generation would look like moving through the South African demographics, pre and post apartheid, because we were again working in 1994. Many of us privileged with degrees moving into the workplace, and many, my friend Maud Matnyani, who runs FAB, which is one of our non-profit members with 100 Black professional women, are part of 50 Plus Skills. And basically, these were her words. I got my first proper job in 1994 in my late 40s. And she said, I'm now in my late 60s. 20 years was not enough to build enough income to retire. And in many cases have moved from the townships into the city. And we're still deeply indebted as we reach our 60s.
Lynda, I reckon that Yeah, I reckon that would be a very similar story in Eastern Europe, for example, in
Yes,
Russia. It might be a similar story even in China, where you've got a history of socialism, even communism, and then a capitalist revival came, and a younger generation in their 30s and 40s who had been fighting for their freedoms and so on. They then entered the workplace in their 30s and 40s, and now they're heading into their 60s and 70s and realizing they don't have enough to retire, especially if retirement's going to be 20 or 30 more years. And so it's not necessarily that they might want to work, but they have to. And they don't have all of the structures in place. So yes, although I agree with you, I think it's a very South African story. I also think there's a global story around that, and it might also be a global story around women as well. You know,
absolutely.
Women who maybe for the first, and I know there's a little bit of you in this story as well, who made the choice, whether it was their choice or not, made the choice to be mothers
Yes.
for a period of time, and then entered the workplace, whether again by choice or not, doesn't matter, but kind of hit their 40s and 50s and realized, all the things I thought were going to be there are not there. And so there's lots of reasons, lots of different reasons why people are going to head into their 50s, 60s, and 70s and need to continue working. And Marilyn has just pointed out, and I agree with her, COVID, unfortunately, for some companies, it might be easy for them to retrench older workers if they feel the need to retrench because of the COVID crisis. Then it might be that quite a lot of older people discover they're retiring, forced retirement, a little bit earlier than they thought they would. So there's lots and lots of reasons why people still need to be economically active in this era of their lives.
And it's one of the things that I use as to give people a sense of hope, is that longevity and technology do offer our generation this opportunity to work longer. It's a perfect storm, but you have to have a growth mindset and you have to do things differently. The unlearning and relearning is absolutely critical if you're going to look, because the job's not going to be the same job you did in your first career or in your profession. It may look completely different. It may be a combination of things, but it does take some internal work for the individual who uniquely needs to walk this path for themselves, but with the help of coaches or a community to prompt them with what are the kinds of things, because we often are in a narrow world. And I did a presentation at First Rand last year with 700 of their employees within 7.5 years of retirement. And I looked down at from the Indaba kind of stage at these 500, 600, 700 people. And I asked them the question, how many of you started here at the age of 18 and will be leaving here? And many of them have. They may not have all stayed in the same bank, but they may have moved to another bank. But their lives have been quite similar, not multi-stage, very linear.
Yes.
Whereas I've had a number of careers in a number of different parts of life, which has allowed me to think differently. And those are assets, that experiential wisdom that come from being able to be forced to think differently because you're forced into different situations. And it's not easy.
No, absolutely not. But that leads to my next question, and I think this is one of the most important questions I wanted to ask you today. And obviously, some of the answers will emerge out of the network. Your 50 Plus Skills network. You obviously will have been listening to people, helping them over the last few weeks of lockdown and the COVID crisis. How do you think the COVID crisis might impact the older generations? And I realize there's multiple generations, so there's the younger old and the older old. But what do you think the impact, the long-term legacy, if you like, of COVID will be for this, for our thinking about what it means to be older?
And I think that's the fourth macro trend that I was going to talk about was COVID, because it has accelerated and forced us all to look at life differently. I heard a presentation the other day where they said 2030 arrived in 2020. And that's basically, in many cases, has forced us from a technological point of view to think differently about remote work and using platforms like Zoom for conversations rather than FaceTime. Another statement I made during COVID-19 was it took a pandemic or a crisis to force people out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And once they decided to start using the technology, they realized they quite liked it. And I've been using Zoom for about 4 years, and on the 50 Plus network, we've been using it consistently for online learning. And it helps you to think differently about, you no longer have to think just about a local audience. You can have a global audience like we have today. It gives you local opportunities and global opportunities. But again, you have to change your thinking from the work you did full-time into what will this look like. But our generation certainly, because COVID-19 is showing that we are the group with the highest death rate, and statistically, they are saying the older workers should stay home longer. That is causing companies to look at this section of their workforce, and I hope that those decisions are to help them to work well from home rather than to retrench them, or to get rid of them, or to help them with skills to move into their next career, which is a second career beyond their formal profession.
But that's now where we can start to give a little bit of practical advice here, surely, Lynda, is to say you can't just wait around for your organization to look after you. I mean, baby boomers kind of should know that already, but they might be the last generation who at least started work when companies looked after their staff in the sense of managed your career. So I'm not talking about care and HR functions. I'm talking about the fact that your career was managed. As a younger generation Xer, my friends in my generation, we all know it's up to us. We got to fight for our promotions if any are even available. We keep ourselves active, always open for a coffee, if you know what I mean, to talk about the options. But the older generation maybe doesn't quite have that mindset. In fact, I can use this opportunity. Carol, and I'm sure you can help Carol here. Carol says, don't you just go onto LinkedIn if you're looking for a job? In other words, isn't it a bad sign that you're actually on LinkedIn? I'm sure you've heard those sorts of questions before from an older generation.
Yes, and
Carol, I don't
a
know
lot
how
of people say,
a
lot of people said, I know I can't go on LinkedIn because I am still employed and I'm not looking for a job. But LinkedIn has certainly changed and is no longer just a place for looking for employment. LinkedIn has become the professional place to learn. In fact, I was listening to Herman Singh this morning, and he said LinkedIn is the biggest free network of learning in the world because there is such amazing content available, and it is a way where you connect with individuals, you stay connected, you can learn, and so definitely.
You know what, you build your network. I literally spend a few minutes every single day without fail on LinkedIn, expanding my network, pruning my network a little bit, looking at certain groups, engaging, responding to people. And every now and again, somebody tries to offer me a job or ask if I've got a job for them. But generally, it's a networking tool. And the older generations actually understand networking well. And it's a case of, it's your little black book. It's a case of knowing if you need somebody to help you with this or with that or with the other thing, you go to LinkedIn. And literally, you can go to LinkedIn and you can say, "Can anybody help me with this issue?" And you'll be linked to a world expert within a few days, or hours even. So yeah, Carol, it's way more than just trying to find a job. It's about building your network, and that's why I suppose you say, Lynda, that it's something people should be doing in their 50s and 60s, because you're going to need that network a little bit later when you start to move into a more consultant role, I suppose, in what you do for a living.
One of the most important intangible assets that we own. And I have worked hard at looking after my relationships because people matter to me. And so, it's a consistency of connecting, not as much as I would like to, but what I love about platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn is that it's allowed me to stay more connected to a much wider and broader range of people. But connecting, collaboration is door openers. We often need a group of people to make what we need happen. It often isn't just, especially if you're a small business, or if you don't mind, I'll use this as an opportunity to build the bridge between Refirement Network and 50 plus. Is that I had this idea of building a skills bank for many years, from when I studied social entrepreneurship in 2009. But all I did was bump my head, because the piece that I needed, which was the technology and the back end, everybody referred me to technical people, but it just never happened. It either was going to cost me too much money, or the timing was wrong. And in 2018, I'd entered a grant competition with 500 people, got to the top 20, 15 got $1 million each, and 5 of us walked away with nothing. And it was one of those moments where I was this close, and then a typical social entrepreneurship scenario, and I had a group of people around me at that point who said, "Don't give up on your dream. Let's come together in a room and find a way to move this thing forward." And in some ways, you have a similar story with Tomorrow Today. But 7 of us sat around a table and decided to look at what this would mean. 4 older, or should I say 4 people over 50, 3 young 30-year-olds, 4 women and 3 young men. And the 3 young men had developed a platform which they gifted to us as part of our shareholder relationship. And that's how 50 Plus Skills came about. They had crafted and designed a platform that I then re-engineered into what we needed. And so 7 of us collectively brought to fruition something that individually we couldn't do on our own. And I think that that's part of what I also see in the 21st century. You don't have to do everything by yourself. And it's fun doing something with a group of people that you enjoy.
So if we are looking then at what happens after COVID. So COVID is this massive crisis. It brings huge significant implications, and we could spend hours talking about the societal implications that we're seeing all around the world, and the increase in inequality between rich and poor. We could talk about the political outcomes and so on, but I actually would like to focus in on the personal implications for this, and especially for the older generation. So assuming you're able to keep your health, get through the COVID crisis, on the other side of this, maybe it won't even ever have mattered that COVID was in the system, because some of these disruptors, some of these forces are coming our way anyway. But what are going to be the implications for the older generation? What do we need to think differently about being over 50 as we look ahead into the 2020s and the 2030s?
So a lot of people, when I chat about working longer, they say, no, but I'm tired of work. And for me, it's about designing and navigating a blended life. Because without a doubt, we don't want to work as hard as we have in the last 35. We want to have time to go on an odd holiday. But more than anything, it needs to have at the center a range of purposes for each of the sections of your life. So what are the hobbies that you love that you want to have more time to do now? Some of the challenges around family are, where do you want to live? Are you going to downsize from the big house into a smaller house? Are you going to go into a retirement estate or stay in an ordinary estate? Because ordinary estates allow you to stay longer in a different kind of life right now. It's about, do you want to be in the city and your partner or spouse wants to be in the country, and coming to terms with the balance for both of you. And I find that in a lot of my coaching, that's one of the biggest challenges. They end up with fights because the partners can't agree on what that picture looks like. In many cases, it may be, do you want to be close to the children, your grandchildren, or not? You will know in my circumstances, both my children live internationally and have done so for more than 15 years. And I get asked that question often, why haven't I followed them? But it's about, this is a season with the freedom to do exactly what we want to do. But at the center to have purpose, because unless there's a reason to get out of bed every day, you will spiral downwards into not feeling worthwhile to anybody. And, you know, money is not the only currency. Meaning is also a currency. So spending volunteer time doing stuff that you're passionate about. So if you're a financial director and you're passionate about animals, then go and offer your services into one of the animal nonprofits in your finance role. For me, having worked most of my life in the early childhood sector, that's where I would sit on a board or help, because that's where I believe I'd be able to add the most value. So I try and help people to look at the whole of their life as to, what do you love? What are the most important things to you? What are the skills that you have that you need or could be using or need to learn? How can you earn money in the season compared to how you could have before? And then the fourth thing is, what does the world need? It's the Ikigai, philosophy. And those four things will help you to start navigating what those action plans need to look like. Because it's not something that you'll wake up today and know what tomorrow will look like. It's a process.
Yeah. And, Lynda, I'm a huge fan of frameworks, of systems and frameworks that help make sense of the world. And one that has always resonated with me is Erik Erikson's life stage model. And, there, I think, 8 different life stages that he suggests, and 6 of them happen by the time you're 30. As we develop our way, and most of them are in that early childhood phase, which is so important, and you've spent so much of your life focusing on. But for me, I'm becoming interested because it is my 50th year on the planet, and I'm beginning to look ahead. Sometime in your 50s, and it's more towards the end of your 50s, Erik Erikson suggested you move into the last phase. Now, I think that if we're living to 100, there might be 2 phases there. That might be a fun thing to think about. But he labeled it generativity. This is a big academic word. But what he meant by that is that you will only be fulfilled as a person if you feel that you are giving back. That we don't want to burst into, the Lion King Circle of Life song, but there is something, and maybe you as somebody who, and I would never give away your age, Lynda, but you're slightly older than I am. Is that true? Does it kind of bubble up inside you, where you begin to think, I have to give back? It's part of the design of my being. That and because I'm fascinated that's going to begin emerging for me in the next few years.
I love the fact that, well, for me, purpose has always been important, but in this season, there is more opportunity, whether it's mentoring young people, whether it's helping someone at my church, whether it's being on a board of something I'm passionate about. Those things I'm passionate about, but I'm more passionate about the collective of the 50 plus generation as part of what I do now. And I belong, and I see there are a number of international people from different people around the world in the chat box, because I'm collectively engaged in conversations locally and globally on how important positive aging is. And we are the ones, the Pass It On Network, which is one of the networks I belong to, this is the saying, is we are the ones we've been waiting for. We're pioneering the space. And we are, I'll use a term that you used to use in some of your presentations, is that technology and the internet and this pioneering space we're all moving into, imagining a 90-degree bend in the road, and that you can't look back anymore at how the previous generations did it, because it's changing so significantly that we are pioneering this change. And when you're pioneering change, we need to collectively come together to support one another. And so that's what I'm passionate about getting out of bed for every day, is to help individuals find their ikigai for themselves. And in that way, give back in whatever part of the world they're passionate about, whether it's job security, young people, education. We certainly, in a South African context, have so much need that you can never be bored in this season of life if you've got a generous heart.
Yeah, and for me, one of the great examples was, and my brain has suddenly gone blank, you might remember, she was a Financial Times journalist who wrote...
Lucy Kellaway.
Lucy Kellaway, thank you very much. She's this top quality, business-focused financial journalist, tough as nuts, just took on the establishment, had fear of nobody. She would take on the CEOs of the world and write satirical articles about them and rip them to shreds in the Financial Times. And then she turned 60 and she decided she had a purpose. She wanted to contribute. And she resigned from her job, went back to university, studied to become a teacher. Now, but this is the point I wanted to make, created a network of people who would then become teachers in their later years. So this is what 50 plus skills is about. I've put the link into the chat box for those who are live. If you're watching the video afterwards, it is 50, the numerals 50, then plus spelt out with a dash and a skills. You really need to get a website you could actually say out loud.
I know it's not
a millennial on your team who can do proper branding for you. But it's 50 plus, so 50 plus hyphen or dash skills.co.za. But if you also search Lynda Smith 50 plus, you'll find it. She's all over the net. So what is your hope? What is your vision for that network? That people, individuals can join it and be a support to each other, that companies could connect and find skills of people who are in an older age group? What are some of the things you're hoping that 50 plus skills will do?
Yeah, so we're definitely not a recruitment portal. A lot of people kind of knock on our door thinking we're going to find them a job. And we know that finding jobs in this age group is almost impossible. What we do is help people to navigate to their next season, but we also give them an opportunity to do a listing so that we know where the people are, that are the engineers, the teachers, geographically, which may not matter anymore unless we need to do some face-to-face mentoring and that kind of thing. But
that's an interesting point, isn't it? That I think a lasting legacy of COVID is that a lot more people are actually going to find a lot more opportunities, because suddenly we've all realized I don't have to actually be there. to be able to provide value, to do my job, to contribute. I think it's going to be very significant.
So for individuals, it's a membership platform. They do their listing. They get to attend a workshop online now. We've done more than 30 events for our members during the COVID thing. At 5:30 tonight, we have a quiz with 60 people for one of our nonprofits. So lots of fun, because we need to a place where we belong. So the learning, our byline is learning, earning, and serving together. Nice. And so it's for individuals separately to join. We have nonprofit members, and we've tried to build national members that are collectively impacting society, where we can play a role. We have SMMEs where maybe there's a financial director needed for a day a week, that kind of process, or mentors. We work with Fatola, mentoring young people. So age diversity builds economic growth is one of our other slogans, is that we really would love to engage with more enterprise development and processes to bring mentors alongside different people. We're working with big corporates like First Rand, as I said earlier, Curo, who have just also brought an online school kind of forward in their strategy. We engaging with them. They asked for experienced teachers who could tutor from home. And we've managed to find them 30 teachers that are now going to be working in their brand new school, all the way anywhere in the country, with a pupil anywhere in the country.
Exactly. Why not?
And so these are the new models which open up opportunities. And so those are the 4 collective parts of society that collectively make up 50 plus. But for us, the most important ingredient is generous, open-minded people over 50 who want to make a difference and grow.
And just to come back to the overall theme then, how do you see COVID kind of coming in here? Are you already sensing, maybe it's too early for this question, but are you sensing some things might have shifted, or do you just think that the things you had in mind have just been accelerated now because of COVID? What has COVID done to you?
I think the conversation of what we're offering has become more center stage, because it's becoming a need both for the individual and for the organization. But I don't think the organization is right there yet. It's senior leaders and HR execs who are still grappling with the solutions that they need to make at this point.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And COVID has just accelerated the conversation of finding ways that if economically you need to let people go earlier, my plea is to corporates is equip them properly for their next season. It's the thing that I've been doing for 5 years, knocking on corporate doors, is don't just do the tick box of the finance piece 6 months before the person retires.
So what you're saying is a retirement plan from a business to an individual is not, when do we have your final meal? What do you want your last gift to be? And here's a financial overview of your package. There's got to be a bit more than that.
It's got to be much more than that, much more. In some companies that are forward thinking, they have brought me in to do second careers for all of their staff, 45 plus.
Brilliant. And that's because something you do have to plan for more than sort of 6 months in advance. Because it takes you a few years, as you say, to build in your, because it's a mindset shift, and there's a few skills, and there's some probably some rearrangement even of your life that might need to take place.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And we know COVID-19 means that the world is not a stagnant place, and we can plan ahead always in one direction. And I think that's the other part for individuals who thought they may be okay financially, and maybe now they're not.
Yeah. And in fact, Renee makes the point. She put a long comment in. I hope people are reading in the chat box. It's worth reading. But to summarize, she said that COVID has given her an opportunity to pause
Yes.
where she maybe has now realized I was doing too much of that one thing, and because I don't have to do it anymore because of COVID, I can make some decisions. And I think that is probably going to be the case for a lot of people in this life stage, that this breathe moment, this pause moment is going to cause deep changes to what they think is important, to where their priorities are, and sadly also enforced probably financial decisions that maybe they weren't planning on. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, for a lot of people.
But it's an exciting adventure to be on, as long as you can put your fears aside. I often say to people, I want to help them see a new sunrise rather than the sunset. And when I do talks for corporates, I say, please, can I talk last, after the finance people? Because by the time the finance people have told them about their money, their faces are very dejected. And so I try and help lift their heads again to look to another season. If you haven't saved enough, it's okay. Leave your investments to grow and keep earning.
Find a way do something else. Yeah, find a way.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah. Lynda, you know that my grandmother, my father's mother, passed away when she was 104. And she would have visited us. She lived in the UK. She would have visited us in her late 90s if the airlines would have allowed her on the plane. She couldn't get, the insurance companies wouldn't cover her insurance at age 98. And the airline said, you can't fly if you don't have insurance at that age. And she was hugely indignant and upset. But we used to visit her, and in the last few years of her life, she was kind of saying, I don't know why I'm still here. She'd been a widow for 40 years, never had any further relationships or love interests, but she was always contributing and always, and in the last few years, only to her family and to a small community. But one of my cousins, who is a pastor, would always say, and he half meant it jokingly, but he was also serious. He said, there's still something for you to do, Graeme, there's still, and she would nod and she would say, yeah, I need to work out what it is so that I can get it done and go, was her attitude. But she always felt there was more to be done and more to contribute and more to do. And I think if you give up on that, if you think it's done now, I think it will be. I think our bodies, our souls are not designed to not do anything. And the old picture of retirement where you did nothing, or you only were selfish and only did stuff only for yourself. No wonder people didn't live long after retirement. I wonder if the demographic shift has been not only because of medical science and things, but also because of a change in attitude that people have. It's like the baby boomers don't want to give up living. They don't want to stop contributing. And so they're not. And so maybe your generation and my generation to follow is creating a whole new thing in history we've never seen before. And I think that's really exciting. And I'm really grateful that you've led the way. Other people are now going to realize this is something they need. You've been working on this for 15 years and you've got everything they need. So they just need to come and find you.
That's the other thing that you need to realize, that if you're an entrepreneur, that doesn't happen overnight. So definitely start while you're still in your profession and still getting paid, because these are baby steps, whatever they might be. Yes, it's something I love. I would get up every day to do it, whether you paid me or you didn't pay me.
No, don't tell people that. You've got people from your network in here. They have to pay their dues.
but to find something that you love.
Absolutely.
And as I said, you are the person who planted the seed for me. And so I'm eternally grateful, even on the days when there's been no money, Graeme.
No, I told you not to do it, actually, to be honest, because I told you were too ahead of your time. And that's why we at Tomorrow Today didn't take it up. You asked us to. And we said, no, we just think it's too ahead of its time. But you wouldn't take no for an answer. I don't think you ever have, I think.
But you did tell me one day over coffee in London, go and find yourself another proper job for 5 years, which I did.
Yeah, no, you did. Yeah.
And I went to Brain Boosters, and yes, that's also part of this journey. It can be fluid, but I was clear, even though I took another proper job for 5 years, I was clear up front with the philanthropist that I was going to continue doing Refirement during those 5-year period. And he was quite fine with that.
Yeah.
So I think being authentic and clear about what we want to do in this season is critical.
Yeah. Well, everybody who's been with us, thank you for joining us in this In Conversation. Now you know why I wanted to talk to Lynda. Maybe just for my own sake personally, because it's my next season that I kind of head to in next little while. And it's wonderful, Lynda, to know that people like you are ahead of us younger guys on the path, making it easier for us to step into this new space, because it's not retirement, it's something different, and you blazing a path for us and showing us how to get there. So thank you so much for your time, and let me leave the last word for you. There's so much we could have talked about. We could talk for hours, but what hasn't been said, what would you like to let people finish with as we finish this webinar?
I think that each of us as individuals can make a difference, that we have wisdom and skill, but collectively we are much stronger. And so I really want to encourage people not to try and go it alone. And that as a nation, and I know this is a global audience, but for me from a South African perspective, if we can collectively use the wisdom and skill at this point economically, we can help change this country. And so for me, we want to be one of those change makers that's part of not leading the way, but being engaged to make sure that our nation survives and that we can all live here happily together with health and wealth on our side, and that longevity specifically starts at birth. So live healthy and look after your wellness. Wellness is going to become one of the biggest keys in a longer life. And so if there's younger people listening, your wellness is critical, as is your finances and your life purpose. So thank you, Graeme.
Thanks, Lynda. And just once again, everybody, to connect to Lynda and the work that she's doing, go just search for Lynda Smith. That's Lynda with a Y, not an I, Lynda Smith, on LinkedIn and connect with her there, or go to 50plus-skills.co.za, or even have a look at the Refirement Network. Any of those will get you in contact with Lynda. She's very generous with her time, as you've seen. And thank you so much, Lynda. Lovely chatting to you.
Thanks, Graeme. It was a wonderful opportunity.